take about 15 to 20 minutes to explain why we are doing this. But before I start, let me first thank you very much for having me here today in Moscow. Thank you for the organizers. It's a great pleasure to be here, an honor. We are a small country, but quite strong organization when it comes to advocating and regulating law, enforcing regulation of lobbying. I believe in lobbying, first of all. I've been in lobbying profession for 15 years. I started in the United States. I spent 6 years in Brussels, and lately I've been working, of course, in my country, in Croatia and Zagreb. I believe that lobbying really is a tool to advocate legitimate interests, and if you live in a democratic society, you must have lobbyists. They're everywhere. So what I will tell you today is three things. First, how we started the Croatian Lobbying Association. Then I will tell you about political environment, and which is critical for making progress, and I believe you will share similar opinions. And finally, I will tell you a little bit about campaign and advocacy methods that we used in Croatia. But before that, just three basic premises that I believe are very, very important. And in the last 5 years, we come to believe this is something that we should communicate all the time before we start discussion about lobbying, especially with politicians. Number one, lobbying is an inescapable reality of the political scene in every democratic system of government. Number two, lobbyists are indispensable for the functioning of the government. Number three, the most important one maybe, the government, whether it be the legislative or the executive branch, simply cannot know all the details and aspects of national life that its actions might affect unless it has access to the expert contributions of the interest involved. Coming to a business association that you lead, I think it's crucial, and we've been fighting for this in Croatia, especially when we started the EU negotiations 7 years ago, to have as many parties involved in the consultations when having new laws, introducing European directives. And this is a new phenomenon. We are still fighting this because very often you will have working groups in the parliament, in the government, without representation of business, without representation of civil society, without representation of any kind of interested parties, and they are regulating us. So we are advocating actually for the change in this approach. So some key facts about Croatian Lobbying Association. I congratulate you, your association. I think it's very, very important, and we hope we can share more information, detail with you after this presentation and when I meet you today. So we were founded in 2008. We are 4 years old. It was the first lobbying association in Southeast Europe, or the Western Balkans. Approximately 100 members at the moment. We are financed through membership fees. About 150 euro is the annual membership fee, and private donations. Our key goals are promotion of lobbying as legitimate and legal profession, and regulation of lobbying. So it's quite simple mission statement. First, we want to educate the public, the politicians, and of course, create as many professional lobbyists as we should in Croatia, taking consideration it's a 4.5 million country. But what is the most important part, we want to hard legislation. So we were looking at different legislative models, different laws around the world basically. Of course, the US having the longest history and tradition of regulation of lobbying, over 50 years old. European Union having a voluntary system which has its pitfalls and problems, and we believe this system will be changed in the future. It's a necessity to be changed. So these are the facts of our organization. This picture here, maybe you recognize some faces, maybe you don't, but I want to tell you just that we have here former prime ministers of Croatia. We have here Minister of
Это которого посадили?
Not he was another, no he was another. We have Ministers of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Agriculture, and I'm saying this because it is important to have them on these pictures. Why? Because then the media, the journalists are more open to the idea of professional lobbying, and they are our advocates in the public, and they can help us defend the picture of professional lobbying. If you would have a picture here without so-called famous faces, it would be much more difficult to advocate. So we immediately actually did what you are doing right now. We started to internationalize. So we have organized also 4 international symposiums with international audiences from the European Commission, from the United States, from the American League of Lobbyists, from Mr. Daniel Gegan from Brussels, who is leading one of the strong training centers about European public affairs. And this helped us, of course, to paint the picture that lobbying is something that's done around the world and it's necessary. I will tell you later about the political circumstances at the moment and how was this impacting our process. But what we also did in the region, which is very, very important, is that we helped create other organizations. Like in Serbia, we work with Belgrade colleagues, we worked in Slovenia, we worked in Montenegro, and we worked in Macedonia. All these countries now have their professional organizations, and it took us about 3 years. We all worked together, we invited them to our symposiums, we came to visit them, and today we can actually talk about joining the International Public Policy Advocates Association, maybe all together. So in the Balkans we have done some progress in the last 5 years. Visits and recognitions. It was very, very important for our organization to make international study visits. So we visited Washington, we visited Brussels several times, we interacted with people, groups, we got educated. We read a lot of books. Actually, we have in our library, we created a library of over 150 titles, and we believe this is one of the strongest libraries that we have. It's an electronic library. If you need some information, and of course we're ready to share it, there's interest to read about these titles. One important note, the Organization of European Cooperation and Development in Paris, OECD, recognized our work in 2008 report to transparency and lobbying. As an organization, actually, they started from the bottom up. So lobbyists themselves started to regulate and promote regulation. Instead of coming from the government, it started from the bottom up. So it's grassroots process. The perception of political environment, and this is very, very important. I put the title of this presentation, The Battle to Regulate, because we still don't have the law. We are very close to have it, but we say it's the battle because we're battling the politicians. Now, a few words about public perception. Public perception is this. Okay, lobbyists, they corrupt, but the facts are different, and Mr. Chairman, you mentioned prime ministers and other. Actually, the other side around, other side is this. It happens that actually politicians are corrupt. They take money, not the lobbyists. No one so far today mentioned fundraising, but this is very, very important when we talk about lobbying. The fundraising is this: when you bring money to the politicians for the political campaigns. There's a great book I would recommend to you. It's called So Damn Much Money, written by American author Robert Kaiser. And it talks about how political campaigns evolved in the last 50 years in the United States, and actually how political campaigning, people were working for political candidates. After they finished their campaigns, they had their contacts, they used their contacts to lobby. So you have a problem there. It's conflict of interest. What was very important for our perception in Croatia, and what actually helped us a lot, was EU accession. As you probably know, Croatia will join the EU as a 28th member state next year in July, after 7.5 years of negotiations. We went through 36 chapters, policy chapters, from competition, environment, judiciary, etc. And it was a long, long way. But we are there at the doorsteps, not at the greatest times to join, but we still believe it's the way forward for Croatia. This was very important because it opened the need to register in Brussels. So I was the first lobbyist, accredited Croatian lobbyist in European Parliament. In 2005, I was working for the National Chamber of Commerce back then. And I believe, I don't know how many of you here interact in Brussels and go to Brussels for your work. Not many people still in Croatia do that. But I think taking the huge economy that Russia has, I'm sure Mr. President said before, there's a great need for your voice to be heard in Brussels. Don't underestimate that if you're not there, someone else will be telling your story. So you should be there. How we advocated for regulation, this is very interesting. So as I said earlier, we were not waiting for government proposal legislation. We immediately started to advocate in public using the media. So we organized media seminars. We would invite journalists who have very, very little knowledge, and when they have some knowledge, it's actually misunderstanding what lobbying means. So we would educate journalists, we would inform them, we would give them articles, we would write articles, and they were very important. They're a difficult group to deal. They're very opinionated, and they should be opinionated, but we believe that we won the battle in the media. However, we did not win the battle with politicians. What do I mean by that? There is still perception within the political circles that lobbying is corruption. So we have to continue to work and educate members of our parliament, the Sabor, current members, some current members in the government. We actually have a minister who believes that they don't need lobbyists. They think that, government can do everything on its own. So the opinions are divided. That's why it's important that you have a professional organization, Mr. Chairman. And that professional organization should be very strong. That professional organization should have academic research. That organization should have international friends and ties. That organizations should have partners as business organizations, NGOs, so you can actually create a larger campaign to lobby your government and to inform and educate your government and public officials. Interestingly, we were thinking about writing articles, what happened in the last 5 years, and we wrote 2 scientific articles. You know why? Because you wouldn't find any scientific article about lobbying in the whole literature in Croatia. Whether you go to economics university, or you go to political science university, or you go to law school, it's nothing about the subject. So we wrote an article about more than 200 articles in the media, and we explained how the opinion about lobbying in the media has changed from very negative to positive, or from very negative to sort of undecided. So that was very interesting. So that's how you create opportunity for speak. Coming closer to first lobbying law in history, here is where we are right now. So we have changed 4 different justice ministers and 3 different prime ministers throughout this process. We met with each minister, justice, for at least 2-3 times. But somebody said earlier, it is not important really to meet with the ministers. So it's very important to meet with the technical people who are writing the legislation, who are pushing papers to the ministries. Of course, when the legislation comes to the political level, the politicians decide whether they will introduce it or not. But before that, there is a lot of work to be done with technical officials, experts, and working groups. We advise to be working on those levels especially. We wrote the legislation. We assembled a working group of legal experts, practitioners, NGOs, Transparency International, unions, employers association. Our history, if there is no legislation, not many people will register at all. It's just part of culture and the system, first of all. Second of all, we wanted more transparency. We wanted to know who is actually lobbying for who. There's no problem about lobbying. There's a problem about if you don't disclose lobbying. Most multinational organizations operating around the world, they want transparency. They have to be transparent. They have to obey the law of the land. They have to fulfill procurement rules. They have no problem of registering. So we took two decisions. The first decision was that we want to regulate commercial lobbyists, so people who are paid to lobby, professional lobbyists who work for consultancies. The second decision was that we want to regulate also in-house lobbyists who work for multinational companies, organizations, but we have a problem with NGOs. And the NGOs said, well, we're not lobbying, we are advocates. And we are not financed by private donors. So now you have a debate, of course, and this debate has been going on for many years around the world, if you follow this debate in the layman's. But we decided to give them European model. And European model is, you don't have to register, it's not obligatory for you, but if you want, you can join the mandatory registration. We'll see how this evolves. There's no perfect legislation for lobbying in the world. Every system has its specialties or peculiarities, and it evolves. It takes years. So I think it's very, very important to have something that's official and that you can refer to. I think we believe that hard legislation is the way forward. Maybe we will change our opinion in 5 years, but at the moment we really think that we should use the hard legislation to professionalize, because we want to grow the profession. We want to grow the number of young people, number of Croatian companies, not just foreign companies, who are using in-house lobbies, who understand that lobbying should be part of their business strategy, of their expansion strategy, of their worldwide strategy, depending on where they operate. At the moment, our current draft legislation passed to the Ministry of Justice Working Group. Public debate is expected, followed by the government and parliamentary procedure. Expected adoption of the law is first quarter of 2013. We believe it is necessary to work on educating lobbyists through seminars, trainings, and networking. And this is a great opportunity to exchange ideas, to meet, to follow up, and to learn. There is so much to be learned. I spent 10 years in learning and educating myself in different jurisdictions. In Brussels, it's one type of lobbying. In Washington, it's another type of lobbying. If you go to UN, it's another type of lobbying. If you go to WTO, it's something else. If you go to London, it's a different culture. So I think it's important to really understand the broader perspective of advocating issues. Number two, adoption of legislative framework is crucial for the development and strengthening of the profession. We really believe so, and I hope today that I made the case for professionalization of lobbying, whether through the ethics code, whether through the legislation, which is sort of an ultimate goal, I believe, but it's important to have it. Number three, regulation of lobbying must be adjusted to the specific political and social system of each country. This is very, very important. When I travel around and talk to different people, they will tell you, our system is different. Our people don't have such experiences, but it comes down to this. I mean, you have to lobby. It's just so important for you to be present at these spots when people decide about you. We learned this hard way with EU negotiations when some countries, and we still, I wouldn't call them enemies, but just people who look at Croatia differently. So it's important for you to communicate your message, to say with arguments what you do. I was listening to President Shimon Peres last night on television, making case for Israel, fighting for his message, communicating message to the world. It's very difficult to hear the other side of the story. And I'm making this argument and making this point because this is exactly lobbying. I mean, you have to be present in the world media, depending on the issue, but you have to know who to talk. And lobbying is exactly this. And finally, working with politicians and government officials needs to be a continuous and ongoing goal of any lobbying organization. So please, feel free to ask any questions.